small research institute in Serbia, which means that I'm not really an expert on research mills. This is one of the, let's say, normal side topics for me. And I usually do training of research integrity, support researchers on various issues, and I provide advice if they encounter some suspicious stuff and ask me, or I warn them if I notice something. But I'm not really chasing the bad guys behind paper mills. So I've tried to do this once, but I haven't come to a definitive conclusion, but it's not really my job to do this. So this presentation will be like oriented a bit more technically and more practically. I will try first to explain the concept of research paper mills. Then I will try to explain how they operate, and you will see it's quite complex and changing. And then I will give a few pieces of advice how to avoid them. And the focus will be primarily on researchers and on journals and editors. And also researchers can act as reviewers, so it also applies to them. But basically these two groups, stakeholder groups, are in the focus today. How do we recognize paper mills? Providing a definition, if somebody doesn't know anything about a paper mill, doesn't really work, because people get confused, and I usually have to explain too many things. So the best way of explain paper mills is to treat them as a disease. So if you have a disease, then you first explain the symptoms, because this is something that you can see. And then you can explain the effects of those symptoms on that disease. So if you just do the search in Google for paper mills, or research paper mills, or academic paper mills, because all of these are sort of synonyms, you will find a huge number of blog posts, of research articles, of news items explaining, actually reporting issues with paper mills. So you usually have these keywords, that text, data and images are manipulated. You have experts even who are discovering those, detecting those image manipulations and also text manipulations. Then there are frequent changes, the frequent requests to change the authors on a paper after the paper has been accepted, and I will explain later why this is indicative of paper mills. So normally, this is not a normal practice, and journals try to limit this practice as much as possible in order to avoid honorary authorship, or adding various researchers who haven't taken part in the research. These are usually senior researchers who want to be sure that the paper is going to be accepted. So in order to avoid this, most journals avoid adding or restrict adding the names, the additional names of authors. But in paper mills, these requests are extremely frequent. And also, most those journals who are affected by this paper mill fraud, they charge APCs, and they have many submissions. It's less frequent. You will see an example. It's less frequent that journals don't charge any fees, and usually they are included in an index such as Web of Science or Scopus, those indexes that are taken into account when doing research assessment. In this specific example that is shown on this slide, and it's linked, you will get a presentation, so we'll check all those texts. The journal, which is published by a major publisher, Taylor and Francis, had to pause submissions. So they stopped for a certain period of time. They stopped receiving submissions in order to investigate a really large number. It was like 1,000 or something like this, a large number of already published papers that had some signs, showed some signs of paper mill fraud. And as another effect, this journal was delisted from the Web of Science. because of this paper mill. But you can see that sometimes when journals are affected by paper mills, they can also be delisted for some other things, and the Web of Science may not even be aware that they are affected by paper mills. Another case, a very interesting one and a famous one and a drastic one, is that for a long period of time, Hindawi journals, a large number, a fairly large number of Hindawi journals. Hindawi was a publisher, initially based in Egypt, established like some 12, 13 years ago. They were like gold open access publisher, and they were eventually acquired by Wiley, and the brand was just abandoned some time ago due to paper mills. So they had a huge number of articles across many journals that had discrepancies in scope. So they were not in the scope, the papers published were not in the scope of the journal. Then the research reported wasn't like properly described. Then the data were not available, so nobody could check what was actually whether the results were okay or not. The citations were not appropriate, so there were some citations that were totally out of place, that they were not in the scope of the journal, or they were not connected with anything, with any statement in the journal. Then they had the content that was quite meaningless, and you will see later that how they come to this content, the text that is nonsensical. And there were cases of manipulated peer review, where, for example, peer reviewers were people suggested by the authors, and there were even fake reviewers and fake reviews. And also there was this problem of special issues. So Hindawi published a significant number of special issues, and those special issues had many papers that were flawed and that were affected by fraud. As a result, there were massive retractions over the past 10 years or even more. There have been massive retractions in the journals, and many of the journals were discontinued even before this issue of paper mills has become like a hot topic. Before we have become aware of this issue, Hindawi was retracting quite many articles that were delisted from databases, and many of the titles were discontinued. And the content of those journals was not, after they had been discontinued, the content wasn't available on the internet anymore, so nobody could actually check. And eventually, as a result, Wiley, as the owner of the brand, they just discontinued the brand, and it happened like last year or something like this. The definition of paper mills, so you see now, you know the symptoms, you know what happens. So there is a fraud, there are fake articles, fake data, fake images, fake citations, even fake peer review. And as a result, when it's discovered, journals get delisted and even totally discontinued. Paper mills are basically businesses. These are like companies that they fabricate the research of poor quality, or sometimes even completely invented, fraudulent, fabricated data. But this content may seem plausible. And it's been argued whether they are relying mostly on AI or ghostwriters. So far, I mean, according to the data available, it seems that they rely mostly on ghostwriters, so people who might have relations to the disciplines that they are writing about. They are using some paper templates, and then they are inserting the data, invented data, fabricated data, and they are combining various pieces of text that may be generated even using AI or in different ways, or copied and pasted from different papers, or copied and paraphrased using a paraphrasing tool and copied into the new paper. And then they usually sell authorship in these papers. either before submission or after submission, and I'll explain this later. This fraud can take different forms, so it's not just selling the authorship. Those experts who are in the topic, they usually say that paper mills are primarily an authorship issue, authorship fraud, but it may combine different kinds of stuff. For example, manipulated editor handling may be involved, and it's usually involved in special issues. So, for example, they may bribe an editor to accept papers coming from a paper mill. Also, peer review manipulation is very frequent, so fake peer reviews or bribe peer reviewers. Then selling citations. I will show later an example when you can see. So if those papers cite many papers from a particular research group or a particular institution or from a particular journal, this is a citation manipulation. Then image manipulations, these are very frequent, and then you will see examples of nonsensical text that was fabricated, usually using some machines. And those are related citations that are inserted. They appear in the reference list, but they are not. They can't be found anywhere. They're not referenced anywhere in the text. What is also important and what is typical of this kind of fraud is that it is on the massive scale. So it's not like one author on one research group plagiarizing or fabricating data and publishing 1 or 2 articles that are flawed. These are thousands and thousands of articles, and it's not like the scale is not even known because the area is not sufficiently explored, and this type of fraud is extremely difficult to explore because nobody's trained to do this. It's new, it's changing its shape, and it's usually this kind of fraud is usually discovered by experts in the field who come across some papers, see something suspicious, and then start exploring, and then they train themselves to become experts, and then they train their colleagues to become experts, and sometimes even develop some tools and start writing about this. But basically, for example, none of the librarians is trained specifically to detect this kind of issues. So we also had to train ourselves by reading blog posts and research papers and news items. The problem has been present for about 20 years. It's not, people are not sure when it exactly appeared. It's a problem that appeared in the era of the digital publishing, but it became a major issue since 2017. And there is a very you will find a list of webinars and papers at the end, and in one of those webinars has been explained that somehow the decline of predatory journals coincides with the rise of paper mills, because indexes started delisting those so-called predatory journals, and this business model was just exhausted. People learned how to identify them and how to avoid them, and then this new model arose. And what is typical of this new model, it primarily targets well-established journals by publishers, reputable publishers, those listed in the indexes. It's interesting that some research areas are more vulnerable to paper mills than others. So it's different. For example, it's not the same if you're doing research in genetics or if you're like doing research in philosophy. Even if those two areas are affected by paper mills, they will be using different strategies. For example, in philosophy, they are more likely to use nonsensical text. And in genetics, they are more likely to use fraudulent data. And this is an interesting paper by Jennifer Byrne from University of Sydney and her team. And they explain why genetics are, while targeted gene research is actually more vulnerable to paper mills than some other areas. And she highlights that basically in that area, it's easier and cheaper to fabricate data than produce data through genuine effort. So the temptation is higher, and it's like easier. The researchers get easily tempted to resort to fraud. And also there are many researchers who are active in this area. So it's like, and also the papers that are published can be sliced, down into small chunks and published like this. They don't have to be very comprehensive. So it's very easy to create a huge number of papers that then can be disseminated across different journals. So it's very important also to know this, but also in this area, paper mills are better explored than in other areas because they are more frequent. The typical workflow, so this workflow changes, and I took this description of the typical workflow from a document that was prepared by COPE and STM some years ago, 3 years ago. So there might be some changes, especially due to the use of to the rise of generative AI. Usually, a paper that is written by a paper mill is submitted to a number of journals, usually at the same time, and then they see whether journals will accept it or not. And when the paper gets accepted, then they preliminarily accept it. Then they open a call for authorship, for authors who would like to buy a place in the authors list. And it's not usually, publicly announced on their website. So they have their strategies, how they approach authors, potential authors. So they are sending emails, they're using social media. Sometimes it's not easy to discover this. And then they are usually selling up to 6 authorship places, because more would be too much. And then authors pay and their name gets included. So one of the ways to start identifying such papers is an unusual diversity of authors, and usually projects are not mentioned are not credited in the acknowledgements, because they are not really related to any project, and they are not related. They're not related in doing research, because they're not doing research together. So they just appear in the authors list of a paper. So this can be one of the indicators to start investigating. Then it's also interesting that authors are usually assigned an email address. This can be a new email address that is provided by the paper mill, but this can also be an email address that's been compromised and then sold in huge packages on dark web. So sometimes you will see, for example, Chinese names and like Iranian names in email addresses. So this is quite typical also of this kind of business. And then when one journal accepts and publishes this kind of paper with this fraudulent research, then they start publishing more in different journals, and then they cite this journal. So usually you have citation manipulation involved together with publishing those fake papers. And also it's interesting that authors sometimes, when they're challenged, when this is discovered, they ask for the paper to be retracted. But also it's interesting that in some cases, authors send, when they're discovered, they send very funny statements, like that they were added by someone, they were not like aware that somebody actually used their name, etc. So you can find all sorts of excuses in such papers when they're discovered. And sometimes they also produced fake letters of support from their institutions, confirmation. So you have all sorts of fraud involved. This is an interesting blog post. It's quite recent, it's like a month ago. It was published about a researcher who published the communication with one such paper mill. So they offered not only to sell authorship, but they also offered to fast track an article. And it's very interesting the way they communicated and the pricing and the discounts, etc. What is the motivation to do such fraud? So for paper mills, it's usually a financial gain because they earn a lot by selling authorship. And there are also discussions, unconfirmed discussions, that there might be an intention to undermine trust in science. And you will find in some US sources that it's an attempt to undermine the trust in Western science, because those paper mills most of them are located in China, Russia, Iran, etc. And there are such statements, but they haven't been confirmed. Experts don't tend to agree that there is this kind of intention beyond this financial gain. Researchers are usually under pressure to publish a lot, to meet the career development criteria. There's sometimes PhD requirements. They also face institutional pressure, and also academic rankings can be a strong motivation to buy authorship in such a paper. And for publishers, it's interesting that they're usually reluctant when such frauds are discovered. They're usually reluctant to start investigation. So they start the investigation when they see that there are no other options. And one of the reasons why they're so reluctant is that they gain financially from APCs. So most of those journals publish, charge APCs. And even if fraud is discovered, their reputation is like declining, but they don't return the money. So they have financial gain whether papers are retracted or not. So it's an interesting point. Then they're competing among themselves, and they are like struggling to have more citations. They are struggling to increase output. They want to grow quickly, and they might see paper mills as a way to do this. And this is a huge problem. Experts usually highlight the research assessment system as the main problem when we're trying to find paper mills. The persistence of quantitative criteria and rankings and prestige in the scholarly communities and the environment is basically the main issue why we still don't have why actually those paper mills appeared and why we don't have efficient means to deal with them. I will now provide an example. It's from my country, from Serbia, and it's very interesting. This paper is not typical because it doesn't charge APCs. And I intentionally selected this one because in your country, most journals are not charging APCs. They are like institutional journals. So this may resonate with you a bit better. So how it started, how we discovered this fraud. Actually, we didn't know that the fraud had been discovered before we knew. The journal was informed by the Web of Science that they were delisted from the Web of Science, and the reason for this was manipulative citation exchange with another journal. It's usually called citation stacking. So they saw that this journal was exchanging citations with a few other journals. And then the editorial board started an investigation, and they approached the library community. And then when we started exploring, we realized that to the research community and to relevant experts, this issue had been known for quite a while. So the discussions started on Twitter since 2021. And there were more than 30 posts on PubPeer. PubPeer is a website where it's a very useful website. I will mention it a couple of times, where if you have a DOI, you can post a comment on any published paper that has a DOI. And this is post-publication discussion. And those comments can be positive, but in most cases, they are not so positive. They are usually indicating that there is something suspicious, that there might be plagiarism, etc. So there was a large number of those posts on a PubPeer commenting various articles from the journal, and they they actually highlighted those citations that are not excessive citations of the same paper, of the same authors, citations that are not referenced anywhere in the text but appear in the reference list. And Elizabeth Bick, a famous expert, especially for image manipulation, she published a blog post about Iranian plant paper mill, because it was about plants mostly. And there was a huge body of evidence on those platforms and also in social media about the fraud. And what's more interesting, one of the experts who discussed this topic informed the editor about this in 2022. But the editor didn't react to this email, and they were completely puzzled when they got the information from the Web of Science. So we had to draw their attention to those discussions available everywhere across social media and platforms. And how it ended. They first published a clumsy correction in 2022. That was before Web of Science reaction. And you can read it. It's like one of those clumsy excuses. And in 2023, they published more than 30 retractions. And what's interesting, they tried to, say that the reviewers were responsible for this, regardless of the journal's editorial policy, editors' responsibilities, etc. They tried to accuse reviewers of not doing review properly. So this is one of the quite typical cases, except that the journal doesn't charge APCs. But the journal was indexed in the Web of Science, and it was indexed in Scopus, and it was eventually removed from both. It reveals the various strategies that are used in those fabricated papers. Also, another quite typical form is generating papers using tools. And one of the tools was Cygen. One of the typically used tools is Cygen, that was developed in 2005 by MIT PhD students, and it was developed for fun. But now it's used to generate those papers. And there is a very interesting research by Guillaume Cabanach and Cyril Labé, who published a couple of preprints and papers explaining that nonsensical text, so you have whole passages of text that doesn't really mean anything. They may sound like, serious, but they don't. When you analyze, the text doesn't mean really anything. And tortured phrases. So these are the phrases like, for example, deep neural network is a common term that is used. It's a correct term. And in our text, the tortured phrase is profound neural organization. And those terms are very funny, and they're generated usually by paraphrasing tools. And they're usually generated in the process of trying to conceal plagiarism. So these can be indicators. So if you, for example, come across those strange terms, there is a high probability that you are dealing with a paper mill. And Cabanach developed a tool that is used by some commercial publishers. Also, it's very interesting. I won't explain it in the detail, but there are several public databases of papers that are generated by two text generators, or that are actually annulled, withdrawn, retracted, etc. So you can find this on this website. What are the challenges? The challenges are many. And it's not easy to deal with them. So the main problem is that those frauds are detected in a late stage, usually in post-publication discussions. So and even if it's discovered in earlier stages, preceding peer review or during peer review, we don't know much about it because it's not really published. The results of this are not published so often. So we usually know about paper mills from what was discovered through post-publication discussions. I already mentioned the exact scale is not known. So we don't know how many. We know that there are thousands, hundreds of thousands, but we don't know how many exactly. Also, the problem is that some fraudulent papers may look plausible, And there is also a fear that with the rise of generative AI, they may look increasingly plausible, making detection more difficult. And another problem is that the investigation is not usually done on the institutional level. So these are usually expert groups, and there is no like wide direction. And that's why it's difficult. You have a huge scale, huge amount of papers, and you don't have a sufficient number of people who could check them. Also, those paper mills, we know about paper mills in China, in Iran, in, I don't know, Russia, but whether there are paper mills and how they operate in Latin America and Africa, for example, we don't really know much about this. So some areas are not really, we may say that there are no paper mills there, but at the same time there might be, but we may not know anything about this because nobody has explored them. And another problem is also that paper mills, these are businesses, so they want to survive, and they are quickly changing their strategies. So, for example, if they see that one journal where they published is delisted, they will find another journal, and that's called journal hopping. So it's a common term that is used to describe this practice. So they're quickly changing. So now we are describing the practices that have been discovered and explained and described over the past, I don't know, 5 years. But at this moment, there might be some practices that we are not yet aware of. The role of generative AI, either future or current, is also, there are many discussions around it. Because some experts say that this may make the situation difficult because there would be more papers, fabricated papers, and also they would look more plausible. But at the same time, there are experts who say that this might disrupt the paper mill market because it would become cheaper to generate fake papers with generative AI. So researchers could do this themselves. They don't have to go and pay for authorship. So we don't know what would happen, but this is an ongoing discussion. And all those titles, you can click and read some of those discussions. And also, it's expected that there will be some new tools, AI-based tools, that might help discover these types of fraud. What are the risks for, so now we are moving to a practical part of the presentation where I will explain how to deal with the risks and how to deal with this phenomenon. So for researchers, there is a risk, of course, there is a risk that you might be pushed or forced to pay to a paper mill to have your name added, and this is usually due to peer pressure, or if you have a boss who, these things happen, if you have a boss who wants to do this and you don't have a way to avoid this. So this is one of the risks. But if there is no that kind of risk, you might be in a position to use fraudulent publication in your research, because at the moment when you're using them, they're still okay, nobody reported anything suspicious, and you might be citing them and using them, and it's not like good practice. It's not good for your record. So this is one of the major risks. And if you are a publisher or a journal, you are facing more risks, because you might be targeted by paper mills, and you may have at the same time insufficient skills to identify fraudulent papers. As the Serbian editor, that was a main problem with the Serbian editor. At the moment when they were dealing with the problem, they were not aware that such a problem existed. Then you may not have sufficient resources to investigate. And also, you may have a limited reviewer data pool, and then you might be tempted to engage reviewers suggested by authors, which is usually not recommended, because there is a risk that they might be complicit with the authors and involved with paper mills. And as a result, your reputation might decline, and you may be delisted.
Your final submission.
You might be delisted from various indexes, and this might. Sorry, is this a question or?
No, I think it's somebody's turned their mic on. Sorry, Milica.
No problem at all. I mean, if it's a question, I will answer it. So what you can do as a researcher, one of the things is to try to avoid those situations. So if you are in a position that somebody offers you to pay for authorship, just don't. We have a guide in EIFL about choosing a journal. Sorry.
Sorry, Milica. Could everybody that is not currently presenting please turn off their mics? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So you may use this guide that we created in EIFL about choosing a journal for your research, where we explain how to check everything. And we recommend choosing a positive path. So you are choosing journals according to their quality and not according to the risks you are avoiding. So you are choosing good journals, not journals that might be suspicious, and they're not that they may not be too bad. There are some tools, some databases that are available. So for example, if you're not sure whether you should cite as an article or not, there is this Retraction Watch database where you can go and you can try to search for a journal and see whether there are some retractions from the journal that are due to paper mills. So you can see whether the journal has already been affected by paper mills or not. Then you can describe Retraction Watch. They have a blog, and they describe in great detail those use cases. So it's very, very useful, and it's also very useful for publishers, for journal editors. And I will show you how to a couple of more things how you can do. Of course, if you're using social media, try to follow discussions on social media, because this is the place where where the first information about this type of fraud usually appears. So it's usually like a post on social media, and then there is a blog post on Retraction Watch, etc. And to be informed, so you can subscribe to alerts, you can subscribe to newsletters, you can follow experts on social media, follow their text to be informed about this. So I will show you some practical things about, for example, Retraction Watch. This is the database, and for example, you can see here that there are a couple of papers that were affected by paper mills, and they were also affected by other related issues, and they were retracted. Of course, here you can only find those reported retractions. There are more articles that are not retracted, but if you want to check whether to cite something or not, you can go to this database and check whether an article has been retracted. And if you're using Zotero, it's even easier, because Zotero has access to this database, and it automatically marks those articles that are retracted, and you can check the reasons for retraction. So you can see here if it's associated with a paper mill. You can see that this information here in this blog, because it's shown in Zotero, but it's actually taken from Retraction Watch. Then PubPeer, I have already mentioned this website. It's a very useful website, because you can search it for individual articles, but you can also search it using DOI prefix. So in DOI, you have those two parts. The numerical part, alphanumerical part, has two parts. The first part is the prefix, and this prefix usually belongs to a publisher or to an individual journal. And if you search by, you just put the prefix in the search field, and you will get a list of all the issues reported coming from that publisher or from a particular journal. So if a journal has a couple of issues, these are not only paper mills, these are different issues, but you go and check each of them. And if you see that a journal has already been affected by paper mills, then, and for example, they haven't retracted all the articles, you will avoid this journal. And also, PubPeer has a browser extension for several browsers like Firefox on Chrome, and you can install it. And when you're reading a paper or searching Google even, you will get this greenish ribbon with indicating whether there are any comments on PubPeer about that article, and you can read, you can access directly from the link by clicking on the ribbon, and you will have access to the information. So it's like very easy. You know that you don't want to cite something because it's like flawed, it's commented, that doesn't have to be related to paper mills, it can be anything. And also there is a Papier plugin for Zotero, and if you install it, you will have those comments available here in Zotero in your library locally on your local computers. If you're an editor, what can you do if as an editor? It's crucial to establish criteria, quality criteria, and to apply them consistently. So if you get a paper that looks suspicious, you just don't investigate. You don't have the resources to investigate. You may have a small number of submissions, but it's very expensive for a journal, and it's very risky to try to deal with something that is suspicious. It's better to publish a smaller number of articles than to publish more and then to face this risk. And you are usually journals, institutional journals, are under-resourced and they are underfunded. So if you see something suspicious, just reject and don't deal with this. Of course, you can perform some checks, the same as authors. You can go to those, for example, check authors in Papier, whether there are some comments about them. You can search Papier by authors. You can search the internet to see what they mention. You can check email addresses. You can require all the authors to have an ORCID, but it's not, this can be tricked, but yes, you can try. Also, you can require authors to provide author contribution statements using credit or any other system. You can require data to be available. Open peer review is suggested as one of the good ways because anybody can see it. And also in some areas where pre-registration is relevant, pre-registration is usually suggested by experts as a good way, as a good measure to try to prevent the action of paper mills, because there must be a certain period of time. So if you've published a pre-registration, you cannot produce results in like 2 months. And with paper mills, results are fabricated. You can produce them within a week. So it's like a good measure to prevent, to discourage paper mills from attacking your journal. Then it's reference checking. For me as a librarian, reference checking is usually a very good way to see whether there is anything suspicious in a journal, because in those papers that are fabricated by paper mills, you will find a huge amount of irrelevant references. And this is usually a good red flag and a good starting point for an investigation. If you want to investigate or if you want to reject a paper, it's a good sign. Also, establishing a reliable pool of reviewers that you know, that you can trust is crucial. So we usually don't recommend to authors. Actually, we tell them you can ask to editors, you can ask authors to provide names of peer reviewers, but never send your papers to those people if they're suggested them. Choose your own reviewers. Publishing special issues is also, this is something that I don't recommend, especially for small institutional journals. And there are some journals that see this as a source of additional funding, additional money, but it's very tricky, especially if those special issues are externally managed, because then you can have this bribed editor, you can have bribed peer reviewers, and these special issues are very, very often affected by paper mills. So I usually discourage journals, small journals, from the site, from publishing special issues. Then also there are some software tools, but the problem is that they are usually commercial and they are usually expensive. So, for example, plagiarism is a common feature of those papers, fabricated papers. But if you can't pay for Authenticate, tools like an Authenticate, they usually also detect parallel submissions to multiple journals. So that's why it's good. But if you can't afford it, then it's a problem for you. And there is also another tool that is used by major publishers, commercial publishers who have more resources. It's Paper Mill Alarm. And they offer a plugin, a browser extension, but it's not free either. So this is there are only paid versions. So I'm just mentioning that this exists, hoping that there might be some tools that are open source in the future. Encouraging post-publication discussions is a good way also, either on papier or anywhere else, because it's usually a good way to, somebody can, you know, detect something, and then you as a journal editor, you can react. And it's very important, if something is detected, just don't pretend that you don't see it on papier, just react, conduct an investigation and retract something immediately if there is a need to retract it. There is a list of selected resources, a couple of very good webinars from experts like Anna Avalkina and also Dorothy Bishop, and also I've already mentioned the Australian genetics expert Jennifer Byrne. So these are very good good webinars. And also there is this How Science Space and Technology Committee hearing, and I put the link here as well, because at that hearing, experts were invited to explain the problem to non-experts, and there was a really good discussion about the scope of the problem and about potential solutions. At the moment, there are no like solutions that can be applied, and there are no clear ideas how to stop paper mills. Probably the whole landscape is like this. The evaluation system contributes to this, and at this moment, this is the current state of knowledge that we can share, and we just all need to be to keep ourselves updated, to read the available materials produced by experts, and keep an eye on the papers that are published, on submissions, on journals. And that's all that we can do at the moment. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer some questions now.
Thank you so much, Milica. I think this was an incredibly interesting webinar on a really important subject. We're all supposed to be vigilant against this kind of sort of assault on academic integrity. If there are any questions, please pop them into the Q&A. I don't know if we have any already. No, we have no questions yet.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Have you been approached by a paper mill? Have you received any suspicious emails that offered you to buy authorship? No?
Me in particular, I have been approached, actually, not since working at AJOL, but as a postgraduate, certainly, yes. I was approached by several paper mills, 2 are Chinese. I don't remember where the others are. And I suspect this is an experience that quite a lot of people have had, because if I had it and I was not the most engaged postgraduate in terms of joining a community, I imagine that others have too. And some of our editors, no doubt, have as well. Professor Ekweme, would you like to ask a question? Lizette Hoffman, we have received offers to buy our journal. Lizette is the...
This can be related.
Yes, actually, I have a question. In what way is that related to paper mills? Because I have seen that AJOL itself gets queries about buying the journals that we index. Obviously, as we do not own them, we cannot sell them, but there's a spike recently.
Yeah, that's usually, I mean, not usually. It's sometimes not related, but it may be related. Paper mills want to gain money by sending authorship to authors, and they have to offer something to authors. So authors have to publish in the journals that are indexed in some major indexes. So if your journal is indexed in such an index, for example, in the Web of Science, paper mill wants to buy it, because then they can publish papers there, those fabricated papers. And they have a venue that is easy to get to. So they don't have to, struggle with peer review. They don't have to put additional effort to make those papers more plausible. So they have a journal where they can, that they own, but they can publish even without peer review. And that's why they're actually targeting under-resourced journals that are indexed in major indexes, wanting to buy them in order to ensure additional financial gain. And also, you know, keeping control of a particular editor, etc. So this is one of the strategies that they are using.
If I may say, that is incredibly sinister. We have another question from Blanche Pretorius. What exactly is the difference between a paper mill and a predatory journal?
So a predatory journal is a venue, and paper mill is a production facility. So paper mill is a business that creates paper. It can own a journal, but it produces papers, and journal publishes papers. Initially, paper mills targeted predatory journals, those journals that didn't do proper peer review. They had some small impact factor usually, or higher, but they were indexed somewhere, and they targeted those predatory journals. But then when the decline of predatory journals, they started putting more effort and targeting other journals. So this is like, these are two ends of the process. One is production, the other is dissemination.
I will admit in front of the forum that my mind is slightly blown. I had not linked them in that way, although I am constantly on the lookout for both. Any further questions, anyone? Professor Ekwameme, I can turn your mic on, I think, if you have a question. Otherwise, as we are coming up on 4:25, I'm just going to give our Q&A a chance to catch up. Right. Well, I think we all have ample food for thought. I will remind those authors that have joined us today that paper mills can tank your entire academic career. Please be extremely vigilant. You do not want this on your record. Likewise, editors. I would like to have a later webinar on journal policies. So if anybody is interested in that, please let me know, particularly what policies you would like to go over. And I will remind everybody that one of the criteria for being a 3-star journal on AJOL is a full set of policies governing academic integrity. What steps are you taking against predatory efforts in your ecosystem? How are you protecting authors? How are you assessing authors, etc., etc.? So this is all part of the JPPS. Blanche Pretorius, yes, policy webinar. I will see what I can do. For now, I will thank Milica extremely sincerely for this very, very interesting webinar, and hope that you will all join us for the next one, which will be in September. And this one will be available on YouTube within the next week. Thank you very, very much all. I am now going to stop recording.
Thank